Across the eastern seaboard, tens of millions of people are dealing with the effects of Superstorm Sandy. The one-time hurricane flooded parts of Delaware and Maryland before doing its worst damage further north. The death toll stands at 38 as of this afternoon. Washington was largely spared, though more than 200,000 customers lost power in the area, just a sliver of the 8 million people who lost electricity all told, about a third of them here in New Jersey, where some of the worst damage was done.
This is a huge job. I mean, understand, twice the number of households affected as Irene.
Another 750,000 without power in New York City. You can see the skyline darkened last night, in part because of this explosion at an electrical substation in Manhattan.
Something, just exploded.
Some of the damage truly terrifying. The face of this building literally fell off as a bystander filmed it. And out in Queens, New York, a massive fire destroyed 80 homes. Today, subways remain closed, as do the New York stock exchanges.
MTA CEO Joe Lhota has described this as the worst disaster the agency has seen in the 108 years the subways have been running. And Con Ed has described the damage done to its power systems as unprecedented in scope.
So the recovery now takes many different facets, some of them logistical, economic, and to discuss that we have Steve Mufson and Neil Irwin, who've been covering different aspects of this. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Steve, you've been focusing on all these transportation issues we have, from things like tens of thousands of flights being canceled to the New York subway being down. Where does that stand, and what are the biggest hiccups?
Well, the biggest hiccups are in New York, where the more than century-old subway system is shut down, and it's really hard to say when this is going to reopen because of the flooding in the system, and a lot of that flooding is salt water too, so there are all sorts of electrical problems there. There are the airlines where thousands of flights have been canceled. They're going to start reopening perhaps as early as tonight or tomorrow, but it'll take a long time before those things are back to normal again.
Yeah, do we have any sense things like the subway, are they going to be up in a couple days or what?
The subway's going to take more time, I think. And the New York City subway carries over 5 million people a day to work. How those people are going to get to work is going to create all sorts of new problems. And if they wanted to drive, well, they're going to be driving in more limited arteries because a lot of the tunnels and bridges are closed right now.
And many don't have cars. I lived in New York 15 years without a car. I hardly know anyone who has one. Neil, you've been looking at kind of the larger economic impact that the storm could have. What should we be concerned about with that?
Yeah, we have a lot of past big storms to look at to understand what these things mean for the economy. Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Hurricane Andrew back in 1992, and it's a pretty consistent pattern. What happens is when there's these huge disruptions, there's less economic activity that goes on for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Factories are idle. People aren't going to work, as Steve said. They can't get on the subway. They can't get to their office. But then over time, it shifts and the rebuilding begins. And that actually creates a boost for the economy. It's kind of like a stimulus when suddenly all these houses and roads and bridges that got destroyed in the hurricane have to be rebuilt. That's new economic activity and new jobs that happen for a time afterwards.
So does it turn out to be roughly net zero, or?
No, it's all, in the long scheme of things, it doesn't make a great big difference, but in the fourth quarter, we'll probably see 2, 3, 4/10% of extra growth in the U.S. economy, because this is a huge region. Keep in mind, this isn't some small, low population area. This is a region that stretches from D.C. to Boston. It's 1/6 of the U.S. population, and so that is enough to really move the dial on how the overall economy is doing.
Steve, what do we know about the transportation of goods? It doesn't take much for a place like the Chicago rail yard to just turn into a quagmire. Are those type of systemic problems showing their face at this point, or what?
Well, I think the big systemic problem is so much of our coastal infrastructure is really close to sea level. Right. And if you're concerned about climate change and you think that we're going to have more and more incidents like this could be a kind of longer-term structural issue that we need to come to grips with somehow. But on the shorter term, it's familiar in some ways to what we've had before, but still serious. Take oil refineries. Typical oil refinery hasn't had delivery since last week because the Coast Guard isn't letting tankers come into the ports in this bad weather. So, and they in turn move product through a lot of pipelines, some of which aren't functioning because the pumps don't have power. So untangling all this is going to still take a few more days.
Does that mean higher gas prices?
Well, you saw gas prices spike on spot markets yesterday. They came down a little bit since toward the end of the day. I think long term, no, but maybe for a few days you might have some localized high prices.
You've also been looking at the potential impact or danger to some of our nuclear facilities that are in the Northeast.
Right. Well, 3 nuclear plants have shut down, and they shut down safely, but there's a lot of more attention being paid to this particular episode because of the experience with the Fukushima Daiichi plants in Japan just a couple of years ago. So people are watching these 3 plants which had electrical problems shut down and see whether they can do that safely by transitioning to their backup power. And they've done that, and there doesn't seem to be anything to worry about. But I think people will be examining these incidents these last couple of days more closely because of the experience at Fukushima.
Okay, Steve, Neil, thanks a lot.